Welcome back to Chords and Queens, the podcast that champions the work of women in classical music. And my guest on the podcast this week is someone who genuinely lights up the classical piano world and has been doing so for 30 years. We have the incredible Jennifer King. Her career is as expansive as they come. She's a recording artist that has won Classical Album of the Year at the East Coast Music Awards in 2023 with her album Oh Mistress Moon Canadian Edition. This body of work even featuring on the cover of Tidal Music's Piano Spheres playlist, as well as numerous tracks being featured on Apple Music. And as any musician out there will know, this is a very big deal and a wonderful recognition. As a performer, Jennifer has worked as a soloist and as a collaborative artist, alongside some of Canada's most respected singers and musicians. She also has a passion for creating accessible music and curates, hosts, and performs in Cecelia Concerts' sensory accessible concert program. It's a free monthly series creating a genuinely welcoming space for anyone who might find traditional concert settings a bit overwhelming, and designed with consideration for autistic, neurodivergent, as well as older listeners experiencing changes in hearing or vision. And one of my favorite branches of her career, which I am so excited to hear more about as we get into the episode, but Jennifer has co-written a musical play with mezzo-soprano Suzanne Campbell about women gaining the right to vote. The play, titled The Bessie Carruthers Study Club, features Jennifer as the British composer and suffragist Ethel Smyth. The play won a Prince Edward Island Heritage Recognition Award in March 2024, and they even took the show on tour. So welcome, Jennifer. I am so happy to welcome you onto the podcast today. And I was wondering if you could start by telling us, sort of in your own words, where your musical journey began.
Well, yeah, music has been in my life forever. I don't even remember not being creatively involved in music. My mother was a piano teacher. She's since retired, but she still does perform and play. But my mom had a number of piano students coming to the house all the time. But she, when I was a little girl, did a lot of rhythm games, music, had me singing. And so she says by the time I was about 3.5, that I had about 32 songs that I could just, do at any moment. So I was very fortunate to have that kind of encouragement. And then my mother showed me how to read music when I was 4. So I learned to read music and words at the same time. I'm a voracious reader. I love researching. I read lots of things. I love lots of British mystery series. But I started reading music and really literally plowed through the little primer book. And then that sort of feeling of discovery of music and picking up music like you would pick up a novel and discover something new has been a lifelong passion for me.
And that's so interesting as well, saying that your mother was a music teacher, because I feel like that can either go two ways for kids. It can either go, you detest it, hate it because you hear it all the time, or it's constantly in your life, or you become like, it seems what's happened is this sort of sponge for music, and you were learning it as you were learning the language, which is fantastic. But in your own words, I guess, what drew you to the piano? Or was it just that you had it so much in your life growing up and it was sort of innate, almost like breathing to you?
Yeah, well, I think yes, I would hear my mother practicing a lot. So that was, and it was right there, it was right in our house. So for me, learning like the 2 lines, that was not an issue. I seemed to be able to play hands together right away. I had opportunities. I was very fortunate. I know we'll talk about music education later, but to learn other instruments. But the piano, I think I liked all the layers of sound. That's what I really love and still love about the piano, is that you're not just a single voice. You're really being able to create and manipulate a large body of sound, and that the piano can actually reproduce a lot of sounds depending on your own imagination and sense of color. So that's always been my instrument, is the piano, for sure.
It's such a versatile instrument as well to play, but also one that's like you mentioned briefly, very hard to play. Like that 2 hands is still something I struggle with now. So it's what a skill that was to be so young and have learned that as well. Yeah. And this is always a bit of a silly one, but on Chords and Queens, I love making music feel relatable. And part of that is asking professional musicians whether they, like the rest of us, had moments of doubt or days where practice just wasn't happening, or any good stories about absolutely flunking your scales or hating practicing them. So thinking back to those early days of learning the piano, what kind of student were you?
Well, I think I've always was pretty driven. And so when I saw that question, I was kind of like, huh. I mean, I've had moments of doubt, certainly with our career. I think we don't grow if we don't doubt ourselves and then say, can I do that? Can I take a risk? But I did have a teacher who I absolutely adored, and I went to when I was probably about 11 or 12, when I was really starting to take piano very seriously. And she only wanted to do repertoire. And so when I was doing these examination systems, like you have similar in the UK, I taught in the UK for a while and lived there. So she avoided doing scales. It was all repertoire based. And then I got to the end of I was 14, I was doing like this grade 9 exam, and I didn't know my scales. Like I really didn't know them. And I had to go to another teacher. My mom, we were past the point of her doing it. So and it was like drilling it in, and I thought, when I come to teach, I will never do that to my students. Like I will make sure that, so that's part of my teaching, is making sure that technique is always part of a lesson, so that it's not, I mean, you learn a lot by just doing rep, of course, but you do have to have those basics. As a pianist, we need that. So yeah, I would say that was a bit of a scary wake up call moment for me.
And was your mom really encouraging of you learning the piano and sort of,
oh my heavens,
yeah,
I don't
like you're my star pupil?
Well, I mean, quite honestly, by the time I was 5, she was like, you have to go to somebody else. So literally, but always very supportive, and still is my biggest fan club. Every time I have a concert, I'm literally walked off the stage and she's calling to see what it was like.
I love that. She's probably so proud as well. It's like the ideal situation for a musician parent. And on the topic of being a student, you're a very highly decorated academic. You have a Master of Music in Solo Performance from McGill University, a Bachelor of Music from Acadia University, and postgraduate diplomas from the University of Reading and the Royal Academy of Music in London. So how has music education impacted your life?
Well, I have always been, we can use that phrase like an artist teacher, and I have always been that. I've always performed and taught on the side, and I get a lot of joy out of teaching, but I find like my students definitely react to that, and I think music education is essential for people. I find even if you're not going into music, there's a certain amount of confidence and self-motivation that one learns. And growing up here in Nova Scotia, we had a very good public music school program. So when I was probably 10, I played clarinet in a band that was offered to every child. I learned to play the cello in group lessons. Choral singing is huge here. We have an amazing choral program. And so we have, like, in the public school system, a music department out that where kids can go and study and learn outside. So that was really essential for me. I was fortunate. My parents could afford for me to have private lessons as well. So, I did my piano and my harmony and all that theory business. But I feel like music education is essential for people, because you never know if you haven't grown up with it. You don't know if that's going to be an area that will feed you in some way. And it doesn't even have to be that you're a professional musician, but you know how to support music, go to live music, understand what's going on. It just makes you a more compassionate person.
I couldn't agree more. And it also teaches you really valuable skills that I think if you never learned an instrument, you'd probably, they'd be amiss and you'd forget that they exist. But discipline and problem solving skills that come with
absolutely
confidence in yourself as well, when you're like, yes, I smashed that passage that took me 3 months to learn. And
that's right. And just to add as well, like, I think there's a relationship. Certainly I teach a lot of one-on-one lessons, but there's a certain relationship you have with students that I think as children, we're not often accountable to many people besides our parents, right? And when you have a one-on-one lesson, you now have this person that sort of focuses on you as a child and is nourishing your life and giving you those strengths. And I find that's what I really enjoy, is being part of that child's development and helping them grow in a way that they might take into the courts, or they might do in as a medical professional, and you just never know where those skills are going to go.
And that's so true. I totally missed that myself as well. It's such an important point. It's almost like it takes a village age, right? You've got different adults
Hmm.
teaching you different things and dealing with sort of those skills in probably ways your parents might not. So just gaining different
Exactly.
experience as well, which is, yeah, a hugely important and blessing to have as a child. Also, really interested in how environment and place shape a musician's work. And I noticed throughout your biography that Canada feels like a real anchor, whether that's the composers you champion or the artists you collaborate with. So, how important has that sense of place been in shaping you as a pianist and musician?
Yeah, well, oh, my cat's at the door. I can hear her meowing.
Just like, I've got an answer for this.
Yeah, I mean, I left my province when I was probably about 20, 21, and moved to Montreal. And and then I moved to another province for a while and then moved to the UK. So in a way, it didn't for a good portion of my life because I was sort of traveling and moving around. But I think when I moved back here to, my home province of Nova Scotia in 2003, I had been living in the UK for 8 years. And I would say, like, I did some study at the Britton Peers School Contemporary Music Ensemble, or contemporary music course. But when I came back here, I was working at a university and working with mostly 18 to 22-year-olds as a coach, a collaborative pianist in a small music department, and playing for all those recitals. And I sort of got exposed, re-exposed to Canadian music because most of the students had to play Canadian content on their recitals. And then I just discovered, like, oh, we have such a wealth here. And then I was asked to be a committee member for the Atlantic division of the Canadian Music Center. And so through that, I started, meeting lots of composers. My son actually has a composition degree. So I've been able to help him throughout by playing his scores and realizing how important it is to have a champion. Like, it doesn't matter who it is, but to have somebody that will help get your voice out there is very important. So it's something that I've kept going throughout my career. And because I've been mostly based here in Nova Scotia, but have done some touring, across the country. But yeah, my circumstances were, I had a university job, I had two small children. So just by nature of my circumstances, Canada has been basically where my career has been mostly based after living the 8 years in UK. Yeah.
And it's so wonderful to see as well, because we were talking just before we started recording this podcast about how amazing it is to help those around you as well, and in your place of residence, because usually, especially I think maybe not so much now, but definitely back in the day, especially when I was learning music, it felt like if you want to be a serious musician, you go to London. If you want to be a serious musician, you go to New York or Los Angeles. So I think by basically performers showcasing that, I'm not from these big cities and we can still have these very successful careers and still have communities of musicians who play and are super talented and support our work, I think is really phenomenal. And that's what I love about your career as well, is you're the first person to go, I'm so proud of where I'm from, and I'm also so proud to take all these people up with me as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good realization, is that one can build a music career. Not all, they don't have to be cookie cutters, your career. And mine has morphed so much. Like, I would never have thought there's certain things I'm doing now that I never would have imagined that I was doing. And it was very fortunate. I had a university job for 14 years and very much part of that community. But then I left that job and then really restarted a career when my kids were sort of in high school, and just juggling all of that, and really not. I've never been terribly strategic. Things have just sort of, I followed my nose, and if an opportunity comes, or I have some sort of divine inspiration, then I'm like, oh, I should do that now. Okay, I'm going to focus on that. So yeah.
And you have such an impressive career as a recording artist, releasing 4 albums and frequently being played on CBC, which is the Canadian public broadcaster. But before we get into talking about particular albums, I was wondering if you could talk to us about what it takes to be a recording artist, and if you approach it differently than being a live performer.
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, I didn't start recording, as I mentioned to you a little bit earlier, until I was 47, 48. And it really was a passion project for me. I had been a collaborative or a accompanist in a music department where I was playing, probably 15 recital programs every March and April. And I really wanted to go back to playing solo rep. And I always had kept that in the background. I guess the recording came as a like a passion project. I had a collection of works that I really wanted to put out there. And it was really just as a personal growth thing. I didn't go into it thinking it was going to get any sort of nominations or it was going to be eventually on the radio. So it very quietly came. My first recording project just very quietly kind of came out. I was given a very good opportunity with a concert series here to do the launch, which was great. And so that kind of gave it a little bit of a higher profile than I intended. So, like I say, things sometimes just happen and you just follow that lead. If good things are coming back at you, keep following those good things. Yeah.
And was there an initial spark where you thought, hang on, I should record this?
Yeah, when I lived in England, I lived in like a small village in Oxfordshire, and I would spend a lot of time in Oxford, and I sang in the Oxford Bach Choir and did a bit of performing around in that area as well. And I used to love going to Blackwell's Music on the Broad Street, and Russell Aycott was in Abingdon. So there were these great little music stores, which are sadly, like so many of them are disappearing. But I would literally go in there and just find music that captivated me. And I had been collecting nocturnes by, alternative other than Chopin, and I had a big collection of nocturnes. And then, as I mentioned before, because my mom was a piano teacher, people would often give her their old boxes of music and say, listen, my great granny was a teacher and she's retired, but we have all this music. Would you like it? And so I found more nocturnes in those books, in those big boxes. And I just had this collection. I was like, you know what? I'd like to do a recording that is, maybe has one Chopin nocturne on it, but as all the other music, and it's such a pianistic thing, the nocturne. And so that was sort of my little passion project and putting that out there. So that's sort of really how that came to be, that first album.
Yeah, and it's so interesting that you say that as well, because I think for even some musicians, but definitely for non-musicians, you probably would assume that everything has already been recorded and all classical music, it's been around for so long that someone will have had a go at doing their own spin on it. But that's such a fascinating and sort of unique way of getting into it, is going like, hang on, I have all this music that's not always widely available or gets the recognition that you think it should. Like you said, if you say nocturnes to someone, they immediately just think Chopin, and that was your way of sort of spinning that on its head and going, well, have you heard of all of these other beautiful pieces of work? So,
yeah. And then I had a friend who I had still a friend, but I worked with at Acadia, Derek Chark, and I sort of floated this idea by him, and I said, I really like a Canadian work on this nocturne collection. And he said, oh well, I actually just wrote this piece for another pianist called In the Falling Dark. And he said, and she didn't like some of my ideas. And he said, so I have all these, like, I had to kind of rewrite a whole piece for her. So hers is called In the Falling Dark 1. Why don't we call yours In the Falling Dark 2? And then he basically just gifted me this three-piece sort of collection. And so I was like, well, I have to put that on that album. And I wanted some Canadian content on that album, but also composers from, lots of different countries. So there was some sort of representation and a few women composers in there too at that stage. Yeah.
That's great as well. And all of your 4 albums, at least to me, seem to have a very celestial theme. So was this a conscious choice? Or is this sort of style and sound of music that you want to capture and are drawn to most? Can you talk to me?
Yeah, it's lots of things. I think I'm a pretty energetic person, which I gather you are too. And sometimes I need to like center and calm myself. So I find that music was just very calming music for me. So, just even in a mental health way, it was like, I want to sit at the end of my day and practice something that I find very calming. But also at this time that I was looking at recording, I noticed that there were all these, you've probably heard them, it's very popular, these sort of, it's like the felted piano sound where, it's beautiful, but I find it a little too minimalistic and it doesn't use the piano in all the color that it can. And so I was aware that, okay, there's a market for this. Like, this music is very popular. It's very popular with, people who think that's classical music. And it is to a certain extent. It's very, and I don't want to sort of dumb down that music. But I thought, there's lots of music that kind of captures that essence, but has a wider scope of emotion and color and use of the piano. And so that was part of like trying to bring this music together and say like, maybe this is another avenue for you to listen for somebody who isn't sure about classical music, like an entryway, and relating it to the moon. I mean, we all enjoy the moon. We look at it, it's with us. And so I felt in terms of somebody that was, fairly unknown, putting an album out for the first time, having some sort of thematic quality, and for lack of a better word, branding. But it does help because people need a way to feel like this is accessible to them.
You've just sparked a point as well that I've just thought of, is like even your album covers and the artwork again sort of go to that sort of way of accessible. You're not sitting there in a ball gown in a concert hall and someone maybe looks at that and goes, oh, classical music's not for me, I'm going to swipe past. It is every part of your records are extremely accessible, and like you said, they're not these jarring sort of, sometimes 20th century music can be, sometimes you really have to think about it while you're listening to it. So these are just beautiful pieces of music that anyone can listen to, and they're marketed for anyone. But I think from reading about your career, something that's very important to you as well is that sort of accessible and making people feel like they belong, whether it's listening to a piece of music or coming to one of your other accessible events that we'll talk about.
Yeah. And I think just to interject a second too, like I love exploring. So exploring music, and I go to all kinds of different concerts myself. Like I don't just go to classical concerts, I go to folk and rock, and I love supporting other musicians, that don't necessarily do something that's similar to my career. But so that's also heightened my awareness of who thinks, that those sort of prejudgments of classical music that are fairly unfair most of the time. But you have to kind of go like, how would this person why would they want to listen to me? Like, you have to kind of hand it to people a little bit on a platter, just to so it's not a scary thing. And yes, definitely the artwork has been very important to me. I had a graphic designer for my first album I worked with, and then I moved to a good friend of mine who's done all my other artwork for my albums. And she actually, I know we'll touch on this later, but was one of the members of this Bessie Carruthers group. So I've had a really great through line with her, and Andrea Ledwell is her name, and she's been just super help.
Incredible. And you've made definitely a very cohesive body of work. And so can you talk us through the process of making an album? Did you create mood boards or playlists? And do you always know what you want to feature and play on the album?
Yeah, each album has come from a different project. And so like the first album I think I mentioned was just, I had collected these nocturnes and thought they were very beautiful, and they were ones that people hadn't heard. So I wanted to put them out there. Then Twilight Hour actually came from I worked with an artist who was a silk artist, and we had a show that we had put together, and she asked me to design, like to put a program of music together that was all representative actually of different animals. And it was a really beautiful show. And I had spent a lot of time sort of curating that program. And in the show, I only got to play like half of the pieces of music. Like I didn't get to play things in their entirety. And that didn't sit so well with me. So I was like, I really want to I think the music can exist outside of that sort of theatrical thing that it was part of. So I recorded that and sort of created a new title for it, Twilight Hour, because I wanted to think of them as like little bedtime stories, that kind of feeling. And then I had this project of doing Oh Mistress Moon, but all Canadian edition. So taking the title of my first album. Yeah, thank you. I think people found that a bit curious that I use. That can be a little challenging for people. You have two albums of the same names. And so some of those works were commissions that were on that program. So that one I very much handpicked. And I had one composer who said, like, what do you need? Like, do you need a faster piece? I'll write you a faster piece. Like,
Isn't that the dream? Isn't that a dream?
Yeah, it was very kind. And then Souvenance, my last album, which is all composers who are women, that one I had been in chamber music programs, programming, like, say if I was doing a trio or with other musicians, I'd been programming a little solo set just for, diversity and inclusion, and had been programming and doing some research on more romantic women composers. And then realized after about 2 or 3 years, that I actually had a really nice collection of pieces. And I just needed to maybe bolster it out a little bit. So I just did some research and decided on the composers that I wanted to have on that program. And so, yeah, just kind of found things that work. It takes a lot of research. So I don't do a playlist. I don't do a mood board. I basically collect pieces, and then I see how they back to one another.
Yeah.
And what composer could follow. Like I do a lot of listening and figuring out and playing through it. Like, how does that piece end? Would this one be better, in terms of mood, and creating like a through line through the album.
Yeah.
So I really love the concept of an album that you listen from beginning to end, and which is sadly disappearing.
I agree, and I think you can definitely hear that in the albums you've made as well, because it almost feels like you understand that you're sort of a pianist that's done this your whole life. Like that's what I get when I listen to it. It's like you've been collecting these and curating sort of all the time, rather than, oh, I have to play these 12 songs and I'm going to make an album of this because a record label told me so. It definitely feels it's almost like a diary. I find each album of yours very inspiring because it feels so personal, and that's what I love about it. And we sort of touched on a little bit, but I would love to talk more about this album called Souvenance, which is a collection of nocturnes and romances and meditations, as you said, all written by women composers, and includes rarely heard music by Ethel Smyth, also Clara Schumann's Notturno, and even your own meditation on Joni Mitchell's Blue, which is unreal, by the way. So can you talk to us about how this album in particular came about? I know you sort of mentioned a bit, but could you give us any more information?
By the stage that I recorded Souvenance, I had already done the Bessie Carruthers show and had this whole character of Ethel Smyth that I was challenging, which I knew we're going to talk about later, but I have this lovely voice.
Stay tuned, everyone. Don't worry. We're going to chat about it.
So I had done a lot of research on Ethel Smyth for this show. I had been adding in more and more compositions by women, and so it really was, I realized it had been on my back burner for a while to do this kind of album. And, these collections that you talk about that I do, I remember being a high school student. And as I mentioned before, I love to read. And I was always fascinated by anthologies. When you have the best short stories, the best poems, I love anthologies because you get to just dip your toe into all these writers' styles and how they construct and use words. And I feel that that's the same with composing. And so having something that there is a through line, but yet you're hearing these things back to back. So that I've always found really fascinating. And also I wanted that album to feel like Souvenance, meaning remembrance, is remembering these women and those battles they really had to fight. And a lot of them died in complete poverty. Like Cecilia Chaminade, who was like she was a huge businesswoman as well as an artist, and sort of going like, these women fought a lot of battles. It is totally unfair that their voices are not heard. And I kind of wanted to just, as an entryway, I mean, there's so many wonderful recordings out there right now that are featuring composers, but I wanted to specifically delve into that romantic period. And then, because I'm Canadian, I have a British passport as well, so I'm dual citizen, but I feel very strongly about always having some Canadian content. Plus, it does help for radio play, like you.
I'm sorry.
So I had the Sophie Carmen Eckhart Grammaté work on there. And then I was like, but I want something a bit more contemporary that people wouldn't expect to hear on a classical music album. And who's somebody that I really admire? And I think Joni Mitchell is an amazing artist. And she has morphed her career through such a large scope of different genres. She's always explored, worked with different musicians. And I'm like, that's the kind of career, plus a visual artist. So I was like, okay, I want to pay some, homage to her. And so, and that's something I've always done, is improvise off things. So I decided to add that in for a bit of Canadian content too. And just to kind of explore my own voice, to add that in.
This is sort of maybe a random question, but do you remember that moment where you kind of looked at a piece of music and realized that it was written by a woman?
As a little girl, I remember I was doing a duet with somebody in our local music festival, and the composer's name was Madeleine Dring. Yeah, amazing cabaret songs. But I didn't discover that until much later in life. But I had this cute little duets by Madeleine Dring, And I thought, oh, that's so neat. She's like, this is a woman that wrote these. And her name always stuck with me. And then later, when I was doing my undergrad, I was playing that Cecile Chaminade concertino, the flute, work. And I thought, this is such an amazing piece of music. And wow, isn't this amazing that it's very popular, that this piece has lived on? And why have I not heard of anything else? And I, did a little, discovered she wrote all these piano works. And then in some of those big boxes of music that my mother was given, there was really old music from the 1930s and 1920s and 30s. And there were these sort of Radio City Music Hall collections of Cecile Chaminade's music. And so I was like, okay, she's a big deal, but we don't hear her name now. So it was really happenstance.
And in a world where it can often be quite hard to find good quality recordings of certain works written by women, what advice would you give to performers or institutions that would like to record music written by women but don't know where to start, or think that it's maybe not commercial?
I mean, I do find now there is a lot of material out there that you can access. Like, you're the perfect example. I've discovered so many composers, and I'm like sort of saving them in my Instagram. I got to go back. In fact, the latest one you just did with the viola and electronics.
Ooh, yeah.
I shared to a very good violist I'm doing a concert with this weekend, and I'm like, I think you would like this piece. So, I think it's up to us to keep sharing and researching. And there's some good, I think it's piano music she wrote, or there's Hensel pushers, like there's all kinds of good resources. Personally, I like to just go on IMSLP, and then I can sort of I have the app on my iPad. I can just and then I can kind of play it and get a feel for it. So and then I like just researching those composers and seeing a little bit about their life. So, I've got some ideas floating for another possible album, but and sometimes they're just people I know, like Emily Doolittle, Amy Brandon, those composers that I've recorded a number of their works, and Emily Doolittle's for sure. And and wanting to kind of keep growing that canon of work here.
Yeah, it's like, just be curious, essentially. Never stop learning.
And be curious and take some risks. Yeah.
Well, that's it, because I think there's so much music out there, and definitely from what I'm currently doing, so much music out there that when I was a kid, and if you thought of women composers, you think, oh, Clara Schumann, Fanny Mendelssohn, that's kind of it.
Yeah.
And Google's really interesting, because when you search for women composers, it will just give you the same five. So what I liked about that advice is, like, be curious, go out of your way to sort of find stuff, go on IMSLP and sort of find for yourself, search that way.
Yeah. If you're recording, it has to be something that you really love. And somebody said that to me with my first album, and they were like, don't record anything you don't love. Like, there's no point. And so that's also been a way, like, you can get a collection of pieces, like a set of 6 pieces, and maybe you don't really like a few of them. Well, do I want to spend the money and the time to record those? So why don't I just, curate something? There was something you just pointed to, and I was going to mention that. Oh, I was going to say, like, I have a trio called Triel, and, we're only just getting started, but we're championing trio music for cello, violin, and piano. And we pitched a program to a concert series, and it was so disappointing, because they sort of said, well, maybe you should do something with the women's studies program at our university. And I just thought, oh, come on, this is not like, I found that very disappointing. It was like, I don't know if our general audiences would, they didn't say that, but the feeling that, oh, well, maybe you should do that over there,
Sure.
I just thought wasn't right.
So you mean like they were trying to, like, do something, but with this space, if you are.
Yeah. We might not have you on our main series, but you could probably do something with the women's studies program at this university, and they'll help put this, but it might not be a program that we would want on our main stage, which I thought was.
Yeah, and I find it so interesting, because that usually is the pushback from many sort of big names and institutions. They go, well, women composers, they're not popular, so therefore no one's going to come buy tickets for that. Therefore, we're not going to put them on the program. And I find that really interesting, because, without people hearing the pieces in the first place and going to these concerts and listening to them, you will never get the audience for it, because, the general public, or the general classical music audience might not have that same interest in researching women composers composers and, lost music that's been lost for a really long time. So I definitely hear that point, but I think that is universal as well, that experience, which hopefully one day we can change. And
Yeah.
they'll be begging us to create these trios and these concerts and these performances.
Yeah. And I'm seeing more and more, programs where there is addition, which is great. I mean, you do see certainly with presenters, like I do find there is still a lot of, male bias on concert programming. And maybe that is, it's similar, women like myself. I mean, I kept my performing going, but I had a university job. That was something I could manage with 2 children. And the idea of touring and doing all of that just didn't feel like something I could do at that stage, but I still kept playing and learning music, and I was still performing, but it was fairly close to home, if you know what I mean, and in it with a steady sort of income. And so maybe that's still an issue. It's hard to say.
From the women I've spoken to that have young kids sort of echo that experience. They kind of go, well, it's not as easy for us to leave our homes and children to go out and tour. I don't have the statistics, but do men experience that to the same extent? I'm not sure. BBC wrote a really fantastic article kind of about women in music.
Like we can still have a career, and I was very fortunate. Like even when I was in the UK, I was pregnant. I mean, my husband took a day off work to do childcare, so I could, and we kept that going, which was really fortunate, and we were able to do that. But that's not the case for all women. But I do think, like as a composer, that's also that headspace, the nitty-gritties of life can stop you from being really truly creative, and that's often we're stuck with all the nitty-gritties of running things. And
I think people like you and all the other performers and composers that are doing it and are proof that it can be done. What I really liked about your story as well is like you got curious and started recording in your 40s, and that was your journey. And I think for so many people, if they think they haven't done it in their late teenage years, they didn't win Young Musician of the Year, all that can hold them back. Whereas I feel like don't be bogged down by that. Let's look at all the fantastic, amazing, talented women that are on their own career trajectories and don't have to follow a specific timeline to be successful.
Absolutely. It's really important to follow your voice. Like keep following your voice. Don't shove it. And I think for me it was more of a personal thing, and then I got great feedback from that first album. And it didn't get my first album when it came out, like I didn't know anything about marketing an album. I mean, honestly, I was visiting my brother in Switzerland. Like I was like, oh, now it's on digital. Like I didn't even know how to upload it to a digital platform. Like nothing. And it's been like university of recording for me, figuring out how to do all of this. And I've had some great help along the way, like lots of people that have helped and guided me. Also, when you don't know how to do something, ask for help. Don't just give up. Ask people. You might have to pay them, but you know what? It's worth it.
And also, I'm a big fan of learning by doing as well. Like, I want to make an album, but don't know where to start or how to set up mics or what studio you should visit. Just go and do it, and you'll soon figure it out.
And I will say, like, I think you're probably going to get to this question, so I'm going to jump ahead, but it is really helpful to have friends that are recording engineers. Know a recording engineer, and then you know what's possible.
Which brings us on to our next point of collaboration, which is collaboration is something that I think is fundamental to musicians, and it seems like a very important part of your story. So I was wondering if we could talk about the different facets of collaboration that have spawned throughout your career.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first person or instrument that I collaborated with was when I was probably about 16, and it was a little baptism by fire, because the first piece that I ever really played with another musician was that Beethoven Spring Sonata, and it was like, woo, okay, this is really cool, like this is awesome. And then it kind of, in my undergraduate, we all had, as pianists, we all had to play with a couple other music students. It was sort of, we got a credit for that and we had to do it, and I thought, oh, I really enjoy this. And then I kept it going through my master's program. As pianists, we were automatically put on a roster as collaborators. And so I played for a women's chorus. I did work with a lot of singers. I did a voice minor in my undergrad undergraduate degree. So that was always really helpful, just being able to sing and knowing how to use your voice. And then because I had dabbled a little bit with cello as a child, and then clarinet, I played for, see, I see your clarinet behind you there. I played clarinet on and off for about, I don't know, 15 years. And so, you end up sort of accruing knowledge from all of those. And then at McGill, and then later when I moved to the UK, I was still playing for lots of singers or instrumentalists. People kind of heard, oh, there's this Canadian pianist that's living in this funny little old cottage. You should get in touch with her. She'll come and play for you. So I played for music societies and operatic societies. And then once I was able to, I had lived in the UK long enough, I applied for the Royal Academy for their accompaniment postgrad. And I had already done my master's, and I was in my late 20s, and I thought, this is a 2-year program. I think I can do all of this in 1 year.
Yeah.
And so I was commuting back and forth from Oxfordshire, and I was still teaching at an independent boys' school. I was teaching piano there. And even with that, people just, if they like your work, they'll spread the word.
Of course, yeah.
So the collaboration I always really enjoyed. Though my master's was in solo performance, the collaboration has always been sort of the thing that I've naturally gravitated to. Plus, I'm fairly gregarious. So I think sitting alone in a practice room for hours and hours and hours has never been that captivating to me.
Yeah.
I mean, I do it, but it's more fun to do things with others.
And what skills would you say are required to be a good collaborator in music?
Hands down, you have to listen.
It's a really good one.
You have to listen. You just can't collaborate if you don't listen to the other person and be open. I find when I do, say, I don't know, a sonata, I learn my part, but I actually only learn it to a certain extent, because if I set too many ideas myself about what I want to play and how I'm going to do it, then I'm not really open to receive. Yeah. So it's I learn it. I'm a very good sight reader, so I can learn things quickly, and I learn it up to a certain extent, but then I'm oh, I wonder what they might do here. And so I want to leave room for another person to be able to add to my voice. And so that is all listening.
I always love it when music feels like a conversation between instruments rather than I've learned this is the timing I've learned it to. Don't ever think that you can go faster here because I've not learned that.
And you can hear that when you're at a concert. And I've heard people liken that sort of relationship to, I know this might sound a little strange, but I teach a lot of adults, and I do teach a lot of medical professionals who have come back to piano later in life. But it's almost that chamber music experience when you're really truly listening. It's like you're doing surgery, and you're all doing surgery on something, and somebody just holds out their hand, and the other person knows exactly what instrument you need to put into it. You know what I mean?
You're that's such a beautiful analogy.
Yeah, you're all working towards the betterment of something. And so if somebody has a little tricky problem there, the other person just, okay, I'm going to show you the way. And I love that idea, that I love the idea of music as being health and medicine, and is a giving profession.
And then, as I mentioned in the introduction, you host the Cecelia Concerts Sensory Accessible Concert Program. So can you talk to us about this and why it's important that we make music accessible?
That was a great segue, wasn't it?
Yeah, it really was. Music and health. Talk to me about this amazing accessible program.
We couldn't have planned that better.
I know. Good job, us.
So this was something that really fell into my lap in lots of ways. But then when I look back, I go, oh yeah, maybe this was a right avenue for me to go down. When I worked at a university for the 14 years, we had a music therapy program there that was very well established. And actually for, I think 7 of those years that I was there, for half of them, a lot of my piano students were music therapists. And so to be teaching pianists that are thinking about how they're taking music into a clinical setting, really, I wanted to explore that. How could you use this music that we're learning and make that something that you could add in? If you're working with a child who might not want to, is selective about when they speak, or an adult that has lost use of their arm, and how you can use music that way. So I had always been very interested in that. And then during the pandemic, the executive director of Cecelia Concerts reached out to me and said, I have something I really want to start, and I'm writing a grant for it. And I'm not going to tell you what it is until we get the funding, but I think you're the person to hosted and I said, what do you mean you can't tell me? Like,
Yeah, it's
that's
like trying to pique your interest.
So like I'm taking things from your website and it's going to be used. And I was like, you what? Like,
tell me what it is.
I don't. Yeah, I don't want to tell you what it is. And then he called me up and he said, we got the funding for this, and at first we called ourselves Sensory Friendly, and it was a pilot of three concerts, and in partnership with the Halifax Central Library here, which is very essential because they have a beautiful concert hall with a great piano and lots of space for people to move. And so we piloted these three concerts using local musicians, and then I was always collaborating with them. But I'm sort of the host, so I do the research on the music and just again delivering music in an accessible way, never talking for too long, but just key points that can help be an entryway. And those went really well. We thought we might get 20 people at the first concert. Well, we got 60. And then the next ones, they kept growing and growing. And now we're just about finishing up season 5, and we get 350 people at every concert. It is. And in fact, what happens is people do have to register for the concerts, even though they're free. And the executive director now hardly does any social media advertising because literally within 3 days of sending out a newsletter, we are at capacity already.
That is
so there is clearly a need here. Yeah. And so, these concerts are for neurodivergent folks or really anybody that finds going to a typical concert difficult. So like I've had a woman come up and say, like, I have tinnitus or tinnitus. So the idea of clapping just kills me. Like it just, I get all this ringing. So, we do hand rubbing or, and I love that feeling. Our music therapy consultants, Anna Plaskett always says, we're rubbing some warmth into the room, and it's so just, and I find when people do this, they engage you as a performer with their eyes. So when you clap, you can kind of turn off and go, because you're making noise. But when you're doing this as a performer, you get all this warmth from people's faces. It's been truly a beautiful thing to witness. And we now have dance facilitators interacting with people who want to move around. People don't have to sit still. We get a lot of people that have involuntary vocalizations. So, I make sure that the musicians that come to do concerts are rather bomb-proof, right? Things happen.
Yeah, of course.
And you just have to roll with it. Yeah. All forms of expression are welcome. So we don't shush people.
People can leave when they want. Is that the
exactly?
Same as well?
And they're short. They're all under an hour. And they've really, really done very well. We had a write-up in one of our Canadian airline magazines that was about museotherapy, about using going to art museums and concerts. And ours was the only concert series featured in that. So that was really great. Yeah, but people are just discovering this is a great way to bring even small children just to hear classical music. They don't want to bring them into a big concert hall. So yeah, they've become really quite popular. And I'm sort of the face of them in a lot of ways because I'm the consistent the host. But yeah, I'm very proud of them.
And speaking of collaborating, you wrote a musical play titled The Bessie Carruthers Study Club with mezzo-soprano Suzanne Campbell about women gaining the right to vote. So can you talk us through this incredible project? I'm so excited to hear this, by the way, if you can.
This was so funny. I mean, there was a group of us, I think it was 2018. My husband had a job working at he's a veterinarian. So he was working at the vet college, which is in Prince Edward Island. So it's Canada's smallest province. It's where, I don't know if you know the books, Anne of Green Gables, it's where that's set. It's a very, very beautiful place. And I actually lived there for a couple of years. And so I had made some friends that we've kept in, like even after I moved back from England, that we've always kept in touch. So I was living over there one summer. And the four of us got together and there was a fringe festival on. And jokingly, one of the friends, I think it was Sandy, said, we should write a fringe show. We could totally write a fringe show. And we were like, yeah, that could be fun.
How hard can it be?
Yeah, whatever.
Sure, yeah.
And then it came like January 2019 and Sandy sort of wrote an email and said, okay, the deadline's coming up in 2 weeks. Are we going to do it? And So we sort of just had a Zoom chat, or I think, and we just mulled over ideas. And one of them started to do some research and said, well, actually, in Charlottetown, which is the sort of capital city of this province, women were fighting to get the right to vote at this stage, and a bill was being passed, and it's almost 100th year. So why don't we roll it around? Why don't we do a play around that about the suffrage movement, women's suffrage movement? And so my friend Suzanne went to the archives to see if there, and she's a singer, beautiful voice. And she thought, well, let's just see who was sort of leading this movement. And then I started thinking, well, okay, were there any composers? Like, was there anything? And I found Ethel Smyth, and she found this woman, Bessie Carruthers, and she loved the name because it's a very island name. Like it has this certain, and so she was an actual person. And just there was a little reference in the archives of her being part of the Women's Institute and going around and collecting petitions. Well, she also worked at this land agricultural college. So she would collect petitions for women to get the right to vote. And so and there was a reference to her singing or something. So we thought, okay, well, we know she sang. And Ethel Smyth was musical. And at that stage, like, the Pankhurst, Sylvia, like they were traveling all over the world. It was amazing. They came to Manitoba, like came way out, like west, down to the States. And we were like, well, this isn't unusual for a leader in the suffrage movement to come to another country, though Ethel never came to Canada, right? So I think she went off to Egypt for a little while after that. But she did. But she never came to Canada. So, but we thought, well, let's have fun with that. And then we got a suffrage songbook because there were so many great songs.
Ethel Smyth, and then March of the Women.
Yeah, that's right. The play sort of starts out like Ethel and Bessie are friends, and they're having a casual conversation and getting this study club together. Because in Canada, we weren't quite as violent as you Brits.
We were just very passionate. I think
we were very passionate. We were very like tea parties and little leaflets, and we were
no bricks through the windows or anything
like
that.
No bricks through the windows. So that in itself created this really great dichotomy between Bessie trying to just like keep it all calm, and Ethel like raising her fist
and
throwing the stones. So we had a lot of fun developing this whole interacted with the music, and then just kind of letting people know what was going on. And we did the Fringe show, like literally I think we just finished the script the night before, and then we went in and did a radio interview. I remember that. And then the next day we did 4 shows in a row, and it was like just trying to remember everything and play, and it was super fun. And then the pandemic was kicking off the next year, and throughout that I think I was actually away on holiday, and I got a little note to say this little theater in Prince Edward Island had heard about our play and said, like, they gave us basically the theater for a week to workshop it and then to make the script a little bit longer. So then it became a bit of a longer thing, but it was really this really fun collaboration between the four friends. One did a lot of research, one was sort of our fixer. There's my cat meowing at the
cat's got some. She wants to share some information.
She's a feisty dame too.
Yeah, exactly. She's like, where was I in this play? And can you talk about, like, did you know much about Ethel Smyth's life before sort of delving into playing her?
I didn't really know anything about her. I really didn't. And I lived in England for 8 years and had never heard about Ethel Smyth.
Neither had I.
And she was huge, like huge. All these operas. I mean, she throughout her life just broke through so many glass ceilings. And it was like, why? And for the longest time was the only woman composer to have an opera performed at the Met. Yeah. Like, 70 years before that was changed, something like that. So and first woman composer to get the Order of the British Empire. I mean, the list goes on. And I just thought, this is crazy. I mean, but what's so lucky is that Ethel wrote it all down. Her memoirs and her voice were just so real and present, and she writes in such detail. She's hilarious. So I was like, okay, there's a wealth of knowledge. I can easily find her voice. Plus, she's a real name dropper, right? So she
Yeah.
met so many people, So after we wrote this play, we would love to remount it again. My friend, unfortunately, Suzanne, had some, medical things, so we had to stop for a little bit. But when Souvenance came out, and I had a very early work of Ethel's, but the nocturne theme kind of thing, I thought, well, maybe I should bring Ethel back to life for the Souvenance. And because she met Clara Schumann, she knew of Fanny Mendelssohn. She hadn't actually met her, and I just thought, well, this could be really fun for audiences to hear from, the perspective of the composer directly in that costume and just experience that in a different way. And I have a performance coming up in the summer with it again. And I think I'm going to add in a few other composers, actually. This Delphine von Schauerroth, she was engaged to Mendelssohn, and I think she was a real firecracker. She seems really interesting. So I thought I'd put in one of her works too. But yeah, so it's kind of had a part two to it, where it was like a one-woman show. And then I usually do an intermission, and I come back dressed just as me, and people don't recognize me. It's hilarious. I walk in and I'm talking to everybody at intermission. Oh, who are you? I'm like, well, I'm Jennifer.
Do you reckon you like take on that sort of boisterous, very self-confident Ethel, and then as you come in like this very sweet Jennifer, people are like, hang on, where is that other one?
Yeah, and I have like this, I have silvery hair, but I have this sort of, she had beautiful head of hair, Ethel Smyth. So I kind of have this lovely big Mary Poppins wig that I wear, and the cane and the big vest. Like, she loved very big, mannish clothes.
Very fashionable, didn't she?
Yeah, like kind of tweedy things. And
I like that's your sort of Superman moment, but instead of the suit coming off, it's like, it's just, I'm Jennifer. Jennifer by day, Ethel by night.
Well, and also the voice is very blubby, and she just has all these wonderful expressions. So, and living in England, and also my mother-in-law was British. I felt like I've had lots of good battle axe British ladies that I can
you can pull from. Well, if you ever bring back the show, I know me and everyone listening to this will definitely be buying a ticket, because it sounds incredible.
A lot of fun. It is a lot of fun. It is definitely memorizing all those lines. I found, challenging. There's a lot of information, but it's such worthy information.
What would you say is harder, memorizing a concerto or memorizing loads of lines for a play?
Well, yeah. They are very different. I don't know. That's hard to say.
Yeah. I wonder if they are similar in ways, learning words, but also learning repertoire.
Yeah, to be honest, it is very helpful if you can improvise in both of those. Because if you know things intimately and well, then you just get yourself back on track. In the same skill as you would if you had a memory slip kind of thing. You just have to roll with it. Yeah.
Looking back on your career so far, what have been the real standout moments for you?
That is a really hard question. I don't know. I don't know if I've had big standout moments. I've had some interesting things that have come my way, but I don't know. In some ways, I feel like maybe I haven't got there yet. I don't know. I do find like I'm at an age now where I have a lot of friends I'm not at retiring age, but they're talking about it. And I'm like,
I feel it's very, I think, a universal experience for musicians as well. Like, I can't imagine ever giving it up. And especially if you go to concerts, you're still seeing people playing well into their, is that Perlman as well? Like, there's musicians sort of, it's not really a job you retire from, is it?
Yeah, you can do it as long as you keep healthy, and it's a good reason to take care of yourself and continue to be healthy. So, I would always say whatever I'm embedded in at the moment is my favorite thing, because then I sort of move on and I have a different project. And this last couple months has been probably the longest that I've given myself headspace to think about a next project in the past sort of 8-9 years, when I haven't had a university job. That was very, I always had, a real rhythm and a schedule to my life. So this is a new time to kind of think about, I would actually like to do some composing. I almost feel embarrassed saying that, but I really would. Like, I feel like I've worked so much on putting my own voice out there in lots of other aspects, but people constantly ask me, why don't you compose?
Yeah.
And composers will give me their works to try out, and I'll give them feedback, and they're like, you really should compose. So
Yeah.
I
Do
have
you write, like when you're on the piano, are you writing things or do you come up with any melodies or?
I sit and improvise,
Mm.
and I love doing that. But it's a very personal thing. Like I should probably start to do some improvising in a concert, like ask the audience for ideas and then just go
Yeah.
for it and make things up. But no, I don't give myself that space, and I should.
Like, do you think it would be something like you said, you love that sort of the celestial, sort of calming. Do you think that's what your voice would sound like?
Maybe, but it might be a little more energetic, I think, actually.
Oh,
Yeah, I think when I sit and improvise, I really go for it. So
yeah.
I have a little celestial in there, but it's more yeah, more driven, more rhythmically driven, I
Oh,
would say,
yeah, no, we need to
than
hear
floating.
this. Definitely need to hear this.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your encouragement.
And so, with
Okay.
that, if you could give any advice to the next generation of women in music, whether they want to be professional piano players or composers or conductors, what advice would you give them?
Well, I have two. I think the first one is don't be afraid to take risks. Don't worry about what other people think so much. That is definitely can stand in your way as a woman, I think, too, in particular. And when I was at the Royal Academy, there was a woman, I think she has since died, but her name was Clara Taylor, and she was, I think, head of like the Associated Board's examinations. But I remember I walked into a coaching session one time, and she sort of, I was apologizing for something I was doing, and she said, "Don't say sorry. Don't say sorry." She said, as a woman in this role, as a collaborative pianist or accompanist, as often as you don't need to say sorry. I can tell you right now that that is a mistake. Like, and so don't apologize for mistakes. Like, and I thought that was something, because that takes confidence to especially if you know that you did something, you can own it, right? But not to constantly say sorry.
Yeah.
And that is kind of a Canadian thing to do. So
So British as well. It's like, sorry for being here. I'm sorry for showing up early.
yeah,
And
you're so, I'm
sorry. Yeah.
so sorry.
We share that in
So
common.
I like, yeah, those things have resonated with me. Like I do have people that have said to me, like, I'm inspired that you started putting yourself out there in a more public way with your recordings, in my later 40s. And like I say, there was no strategic plan. It was just kind of a passion project that turned into another passion project. And I would shovel a little money aside to pay for those things. It would be, if I had adjudicating or extra work. And then just, I've been fortunate to get some funding too. We have some, well, which is starting to dry up here in Nova Scotia, but I've been lucky to access some funding for some of my projects too, especially for marketing, because that's somewhere, you do the work and you record, but then it's got to go to market, right? So, and we're uncomfortable with that as classical musicians. We really are, so it's getting over yourself. Don't stand in your way.
Well. And my final question, which I'm always aware is the hardest, is I've started a playlist where each guest I have on the podcast shares their favorite piece written by a woman. So I'd love to know, which piece would you add?
Yeah. Well, I mean, is it okay that I share one that's from my last album?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I love.
We're talking about promoting yourself and being open.
Yeah,
definitely. I love to see it.
Okay. Well, I really love this composer, Sophie Carmenek-Gramate, and she's fascinating. She really is fascinating. And we do claim her as Canadian, though she was born in Russia, studied in Berlin. And there's a caprice on Souvenance, Caprice number 2, Gute Ruhe, so good night or sweet dreams. And it's a little song that she and her husband would sing to each other before they went to bed every night. And then she just created this incredible piece out of this little simple melody line that just comes back at the end. And yeah, I find her a very interesting character because she was exposed to a lot of music, and her voice is kind of has a feeling of lots of influence, but she is also such an original, and her music has this sort of improvised feel to it. I really admire what she did, and she definitely had she had a tough life. She's supposedly, I've done some pretty serious research. They don't know who her father was, but her mother was a violin and piano teacher in the Tolstoy household. And then when she was pregnant with Sophie, left and moved to Berlin and kept her daughter hidden So it's a really fascinating story. I did a big deep dive into her because one of the things with Souvenance was I'll send you a copy. I created like a little journal booklet instead of doing a CD. And I wanted to find quotes of the composers about their artistic lives. Yeah, but you wouldn't believe how difficult it is to find. Their voices weren't recorded. Some of them, there's no direct quotes.
Yeah.
Because nobody ever asked them how they felt about their music. Like, that was shocking to me.
Yeah, but I mean, on this podcast as well, we do deep dives into composers' lives, and that's my main issue, or the challenge I face is not only that, but just like people that have never written down the stories of these composers' lives. So you have like this short little biography. It's like, this composer wrote this piece. They were born at this location, and that's kind of all you have to know about them, which is so sad as well. So I echo that. And so with that, thank you again, Jennifer, for being on Chords and Queens. It's been fabulous getting to hear about your musical journey and career. And if you'd like to support Jennifer's work, her music is widely available to stream and listen to, and you can find her at jenniferkingpiano.com and Instagram at jenniferkingpiano. As always, thank you for listening to Chords and Queens, and if you'd like to give us a follow on TikTok and Instagram, you can find us at Chords and Queens. Thank you again for listening, and I will see you again next week.